Hello, my name is Miko Matsumura, and I'm a managing partner with Gumi Crypto's Capital. We did invest in the earliest stages of startups like OpenSea, Yield Guild Games, and a number of these sort of Web3 and Metaverse giants. So we're very excited here to present a conversation with Yat Su, who is the head of Animoca. So would love to have Yat introduce himself a bit.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here, Miko. My name is Yad. I'm chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. It's a company that has been involved in what we call basically developing and promoting digital property rights through NFTs and obviously in the whole Web3 space. And, together with Gumi, we have, a whole bunch of co-investments like OpenSea and a whole bunch of other ones. We're the ones that own the Sandbox as well, most recently TinyTap and sort of Open Campus involvement. We're also shareholders in companies like Yuga Labs, Cool Cats, and 400 other plus other sort of NFT Web3 related companies. We continue to be both an operator and investor in the space, and very very happy in helping grow the space.
So lately, what I've been hearing everywhere is I've been hearing that Web3 is dead. I've been hearing the metaverse is dead. And I've just been hearing it's all about AI all day. So I would love to get your thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I was actually just at TED and I was giving a talk about Web3 on main stage, and the sentiment was kind of felt throughout as well. And people don't realize actually because they look at Facebook and they think of Facebook as a metaverse. And so within your own little bubble, it turns out that Facebook has actually created this mind trick where, because Facebook is so-called sort of, I guess, quasi killing off parts of its metaverse, suddenly everything about metaverse is dead. But I would say that if you take a look at, there's also two kinds of metaverses, right? There's the metaverse as we know it, in terms of how we think of it in VR goggles or like Fortnite experiences. That's one type, right? And Tim Sweeney had an interesting sort of tweet about that, where he said, "Yes, we should celebrate the death of 600 million active players in the space," right? So that's kind of one element.
Ah,
But the one that's actually for us much more relevant and the really powerful part that means something, I think, for everyone in this conference is the open metaverse. And a few stats I think that are worth mentioning in the open metaverse. Like the open metaverse economic activity last year in the combined sort of open metaverse was actually in excess of $30 billion, right? And the treasuries that were contained in these open metaverses and those are run by its communities was actually $12 billion. Now, just put that in context. $30 billion of economic activity is roughly the GDP of Cyprus and Iceland. And from a sort of a foreign fiscal reserves perspective, that's rough $12 billion is roughly just below that of the fiscal reserves of New Zealand, right? And it's creating employment for millions of people. So from that perspective, I would say the open metaverse is actually doing quite well, but it is a parallel universe. People don't quite understand that. And just one more last sort of data point. A key component of this open metaverse is obviously NFTs. Last year, last year, NFTs did $24 billion of sales, and the important factor is that 90% of its value went to creators and owners of the NFTs. Spotify, which you could argue is the biggest, like royalty payer, I guess, in the musical space, only paid out $7 billion in that same year. So, there's a clear argument financially here, in terms of why one is better than the other. Spotify serves, hundreds of millions of users, and the open metaverse and NFTs and so on still only serves a very small number in comparison. So the growth trajectory is clearly there.
I think one of the responsibilities of investors like yourself and myself in this space is to kind of dip our heads into the future. And I think $7.6 billion of investment went into Web3 gaming in 2022, which was last year. But I think, as everyone in the game industry knows, it actually takes time to make fun games, right? So I think the kind of dearth of fun games in the Web3 segment shouldn't be held as evidence that the segment hasn't succeeded. We just are getting started. So I think that's a very important distinction. I loved your comparison with kind of national economies. I think that Hilmar, the CEO of CCP Games, recently raised $40 million to bring the EVE Online universe into essentially Web3. he said that my job is to make games that are more meaningful than real life. Right. And I think that this is a terrific thing to say, because when you talk about economic stimulus, one of the things everyone's saying AI, 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 but the thing that's really kind of potentially scary is that AIs could take a lot of people's jobs. Right. So the thing that I think is quite interesting is when you think about the way Microsoft defines the metaverse, like they're thinking that it's Activision Blizzard, right? So in a sense, like, I was speaking with Neil Stevenson, creator of the metaverse concept. He said, I asked him to define the metaverse, and he said the metaverse has to be fun, right? Like that's basically was his take, right? So I think Satya Nadella thinks the same thing, right? So, I think metaverse and gaming are pretty inseparable. And I think if anything died with Horizon and Facebook, it's the boring metaverse maybe died.
Well, yes. So first of all, I mean, it is somewhat the boring metaverse, you could say, because it's also the corporate metaverse, right? I think that's the other part of the problem. But one of the things that I would also add, when the way that we define sort of the open metaverse in particular, is that we actually have sovereignty over our assets in these games, right? I mean, so this is the thing that a lot of people often don't appreciate in the sort of gaming world. And there's a distinction, by the way, between, as you well know, between Asia and the US. But let's just generally talk about the US gamer. He doesn't understand that when he buys something in games, he's actually renting something and he has no ownership over them,
Yeah.
even though he's paying money for it. Emotionally, though, he doesn't think he's renting. Right? He thinks he owns it and he should have the ability to do whatever he wants. People don't say, "Hey, that was a great sort of gun I just rented." Right? Everyone's like, "I purchased it," so they think they
Yes.
should own it. So that's the first paradigm. The second one, of course, is that because you don't actually own this, it means they can change the rules on you and they can control everything around it. Which and also you have to seek permission for everything. When you take that in the economic context, if I don't have the freedom of the things that I own, I can't transact with it. A lot of people just focus on the idea of trading. That's only one level of what ownership can do. True ownership actually means people can compose experiences on top of it. Basically, if you think about the whole modding culture, except it is permissionless, that means that the ownership in games of these items can suddenly spread into the thousands, if not tens of thousands of different network effects that can happen because you happen to own things. And we've seen an early version of this, but not in a sort of a value construct, but in an open source construct, which is the early days of Minecraft. Right? Minecraft is actually the second most popular game after Roblox. Both of them, interestingly enough, UGC type games. And the reason why the ecosystem continues to grow is because people are making their own content, because they have a sense of ownership, even if it's virtual, around it and experience. And this whole ecosystem, that economy around Minecraft, is the reason why Minecraft continues to grow, despite Microsoft's worst efforts, shall we say, because they're not really doing a good job in promoting Minecraft. Right? It's a fact that you have Mineplex and Forge and all these other things. They're the ones who are promoting it. That's the ecosystem in play. And with NFTs, we see those ecosystems play around as well, but they start with the asset itself. So, for instance, if you look at something like Bored Apes, it feels like a little alien, but actually, it's not that someone makes a game and then the assets sort of necessarily grow from that. It's actually that there's an asset and games are being built around basically the Bored Apes. And so the center of the experience becomes the assets, and the games become value, sort of containers of value potentially for the assets or other experiences. Meaning that when I own something in the game, you could have 10 or 20 or 30 different utilities. And I see this, for instance, solving SQL issues in games. If you're moving your games from lineage 1 to lineage 2, it's not going to be a case of being replaced and getting some credit. You can take the same items with you from one game to the other, in which you have emotional and sentimental attachment. In the real world, we spend all this money on things that actually don't give us any superpowers. We just do it because it looks cool, whether it's physical things like tattoos or fashion items or Birkin bags or whatever it is, or even the cars we drive. And in the virtual world, we spend billions of dollars on skins and trinkets and other things that make us look cool and have no utility in the classic sense, right? So there's complete parallels between that.
Yeah. And I wanted to emphasize that, since we've been talking about AI is actually going to destroy all authenticity, right? It's going to be people are going to be like bots. There's going to be fake profiles. There's going to be fake videos. There's going to be fake everything. And the thing that I think Web3 does do is produce cryptographic authenticity, right? So in a sense, like this idea of ownership, right? So for me, the thing that's interesting is that fun becomes the lighter fluid, but actually ownership and belonging actually becomes sort of the real reason why the metaverse thrives. And I think to me, the thing that is so one of the things I love saying is that like The difference between Web 2 gaming and Web 3 gaming is that in Web 2 gaming, the game owns the player, right? In Web3 gaming, the player owns the game. And one of the things I'm responding to is you were talking about these long lasting lineages of gamings and really things like player owned IP and something like Bored Apes, right? So to me, the excitement is this is the Mario movie just made $1 billion box office, right? We're talking about 4 quadrant, multi-generational IP, right? And we're talking about these long-lasting franchises, right? That's what we're going to see is we're going to see gamer-centric transmedia. And one way I define gamer centricity is that the characters in the movie, you can actually know what's happening on the controller. So when you're watching the Mario movie, you know when the player is hitting the jump button, like you can just see it on screen, right? That's player centric. When you're watching Netflix Arcane, you know that Jinx is launching Super Mega Death Rocket, it's pressing R, right? So that feeling of the game in the movie is now kind of the final tipping point for gamer centric culture becoming culture. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why this will continue to take off. So you mentioned Japan. Obviously, Mario's from Japan. Top IPs like Pokemon, Hello Kitty are all from Japan. I'm curious about
Yep.
your view on Asia and what's happening there.
Well, first of all, there's definitely a different perspective in Asia and Middle East as well, which is that people are really into the sort of Web3 and Metaverse and NFT space. And you can see this already when big gaming companies, whether it's the Square Enixes or whether it's Krafton in Korea or companies in Hong Kong or Southeast Asia, they're all embracing Web3. They're all saying they're going to do NFTs and do stuff in that area, in contrast to the US, right? So it's a very interesting narrative. But the biggest gaming market in the world happens to be Asia, right? And even the Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida-san, actually made part of his national agenda last year Web3 and Metaverse. And Japan even issued an NFT white paper.
Smart.
And actually has a working group that's studying DAOs and so on, right? And we have an operation there and we're building stuff there just because Japan is such a progressive market. Japan, right? I mean, they're not necessarily known to be most progressive about things, but here they are. But a really big part of this also has to do with the fact that anything related to culture, right, in this case, digital culture, is something that becomes important to have ownership and a way in which you can manage your rights around it and not be dependent on platforms that essentially control all of that. And if you look at it from the lens from an Asian perspective, they are very much dependent, if not colonized, by Western or particularly American technologies, right? They rely on Facebook, they rely on LinkedIn, they rely on Amazon and Google, right? Whereas, with Web3, they see an opportunity to actually build their own platforms away from sort of these central powers, as it were, in a decentralized manner and build their own narratives and actually build their own identity. So I think that's actually another sort of fascinating arc, which is one of the reasons why the region is going so hot on it. Hong Kong as well. I mean, it has probably some of the most forward crypto rules out there, and it's one of the largest financial markets in the world. And there was a big Web3 festival. I mean, Hong Kong even has a Web3 fund for promotion. That's it, right? For promoting activities in Hong Kong. So that's really fascinating. Just quickly, just covering this topic on AI, I totally agree with you that AI is going to validate basically your true ownership of things, and it will protect sort of the stuff that's dear to you because now you have a way in which you can prove that ownership. But there's the other thing to consider also, particularly when you think about what AI will do inside games. They're going to be autonomous. You're going to actually have more deeper relationships because you can actually have stuff going on with them, and they're going to do transactions for you, right? And just think about what financial sort of framework are AI and NPCs going to be using. They're going to be using blockchain. They're going to be using crypto. They're not going to open a bank account and sort of transact fiat, right? And this part is also going to be something that's just really going to sort of explode in big ways, whether this is inside a game or outside. And our identities. You talk about culture. Gaming culture is already defining, if you think about it, the physical world already. But who owns this? This is the other thing. This gaming culture, which is so dear to our identity, at the end,
Yeah.
doesn't belong. None of it really belongs to us, right? And that's actually what this really means here as well. That your personal identity can now really be your sovereign property, as opposed to something that is controlled by someone else.
I would love to ask you a question about how video games get financed. So, really curious about that.
I think one of the most amazing things about, particularly when you talk about Web3 and the open metaverse, is that there's $12 billion in these decentralized autonomous organizations, these DAOs, that are not actually run by sort of traditional VCs, but they're run by the community who want to basically see things happen with their IP that they've developed. $12 billion is bigger than probably most VC funds put together, particularly when it comes to gaming. And that's actually an area not only just as an opportunity, but also for people to learn about how can you sort of participate and activate these. So I'm, on the special counsel of something called ApeCoin. We've actually funded over 43 proposals so far, if not more. Went through 80 of them, millions of dollars deployed in cool little things, including games and other items and sort of emojis and so on. And it sounds maybe fun and whimsical, but that's what games is all about, right? And there's many other DAOs that you could go into as you attach yourself to those communities. And that is just, and then also the other thing, of course, is that, people in the blockchain space themselves, what's their culture? I mean, they're generally pretty young people. They're all gamers, right? They're all people who love to play games. How are these projects being funded? They're actually not just being funded by DAOs, they're also being funded by individuals and other people who love this sort of space. So I think there's something really, really powerful there. And it speaks to not only the sort of nature of financing as a sort of a central effect from VCs, but also the fact that decentralized financing comes from the community themselves and grows up a new culture. Like Silicon Valley and angel investing, for instance, is the reason why the Valley has blossomed the way that it did, because people have made money in their jobs and then they redeployed in the industry, which is why the Valley is as powerful as it is. And we think this can happen basically in Web3 with, for instance, blockchain gaming.
Yeah, I just want to say this is that there's definitely something hugely generational here. I do think that when boomers got rich, they started producing movies. So I think that, obviously the generational thesis here is, of course, that gamer culture is culture, right? So really, when you think about like the crypto whales, right, they're very likely to sponsor games, and they already are, right? So I do think that one of the crimes of the gaming industry is sort of dominance of suits, right? And the suits actually kind of force game developers to crunch, right? And then the problem isn't do or die. The problem is do and die, right? The problem is when everyone makes this heroic effort to ship the game, and then someone who's very disconnected from the game comes by, and says you're canceled, right? So that's very, very painful. To me, the idea that there is actually this person who grew up gaming, who loves gaming, who wants to finance games and be a producer, that brings love back into the equation. And I think that makes for a much better source of financing. So what are your thoughts?
Well, first, I totally agree with that because the community can finance it, but also the opportunities of success because of the fact that Web3 games are basically under the framework of actual true digital property rights, have the ability to have capital formation. So that means that the economic effect is much larger. That's why NFTs, for instance, digital assets in games, because they have multiple network effects, are more valuable. It also means, therefore, that you can have a sustainable game in terms of revenues for, let's say, an indie game developer that's only tens of thousands of players, right? Like this is something that a lot of Web2 sort of game companies really struggle with because they have average ARPUs of single dollars or double dollar digits, and then there's this Web3 NFT game and it has thousands of dollars of sort of equivalent ARPU, and they go, how is that possible? And that's possible because of the digital property rights paradigm. In the same way that a rental economy in the physical world is going to have a very low economic framework comparison to a physical sort of like a world that has actual sort of property rights, and therefore you can sort of give forward value 10, 20 years, whatever that factor is in terms of its potential. Because when you own something, you can invest in something. So I see this actually even more sort of a bigger opportunity for indie game developers to create the games that they love to do without having to make a game that has to service 10 million users. I mean, that's the issue, right? Like if you, it's like, if it's to me, it's like the parallel of, basically choosing between, the kind of food that you like versus fast food. And the gaming world is forced to go to fast food because we have to basically appeal to the largest sort of common denominator when actually there's an experience that doesn't need to satisfy 10 million players. There's an experience that could satisfy literally just a niche community of thousands or tens of thousands of players who are willing to basically to experience it in the Web3 paradigm because it's actually sustainable, right? That's the thing. A lot of Web2 game companies sort of criticize Web3 game companies because they say, hey, this only has 100,000 players or 200,000 players. That's not real. Sandbox has only 250,000 players. That's true. But the average wallet owner of a landowner is between $500,000 to $2 million US. I mean, right? It's so.
Amazing.
I mean, and again, not every game is like that. All I'm just saying is that it's just a very different paradigm, and it allows you to build a custom experience for your particular audience in the same way that we experience food and other kinds of culture and fashion. right? It's not the same for everyone. So I think that's the real powerful thing. And to me, it's always puzzling when indie game developers in particular seem to object against it, when in fact, I think it is the cure for not just the financing side, but for your audience addressing, right? It's like the thousand true fan argument. You can really, really sort of service your thousand true fans.
Yeah, and I think by giving ownership to the really dedicated players who love the game, who are helping finance the game, who are, when you think about what Hilmar said about games that are more meaningful than real life, like that is really an aspirational statement. I think a lot of game developers really have similar aspirations. And we're talking about the creation of player owned, long lasting, multi generational transmedia IP franchises, right? So we're really talking about a bright future that's very loyal to games and very loyal to game IP and very much kind of inclusive of a community. So I just think that this is a terrific, exciting, wonderful future, very positive. And I just wanted to thank you for joining this and having this conversation with me.
I thank you so much for having me on here, and I enjoyed it very much as well. Thank you.